Let's do this. Round two. The heavy days.
So it's already recording. We can just go for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We can
So it's
raw dog this thing.
now the tables have turned and it's my turn to ask you questions.
That is correct. Three
And
questions.
the three categories are: first, health and fitness; two, fatherhood and being a parent; and
That's
then
it.
category three, spin of the wheel. We don't even know what it could be.
Yeah, I was trying to think of things in category three the first time and was like, wait a second, everything I care about is within the first two categories.
It's
So it
tough.
was hard. And you could kind of make the argument that even what I asked about was music, and that kind of could fall in the health and wellness category. But hey, I think it's open.
Okay. Question number one: what is something that you've changed your mind about since you have called health and fitness your profession?
Oh, I mean, countless things.
What's something that you would travel back in time to 2000, I'm going to guess like 2004, Pat?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that a good guess?
That's a great guess. That's when I started. But I think the thing that I'll go back to that I think I wish I could travel back and help myself with was it's one thing that then impacted a bunch of other things. And the main thing was that as a coach, I knew that I was effective as like a loud, over the top asshole. And what effective to me meant was that people responded. And then as I watched more and more coaches and I started developing more and more people, I realized that you don't need to be me to be effective. You can be really effective as somebody who's quiet and reserved and pulled back and just makes sure that everything they say is so profound or so meaningful to the direct person that they don't need to be a loud asshole to be seen. And that was huge for me because it opened my eyes. It also opened my eyes to reflecting on who I was and what I was doing to see if what I was doing was actually effective, which was the second thing that, looking back, I'm like, what I was doing was effective for the people it was effective for, but it turned off a huge swath of people from ever connecting with me because of how I was. So I think the two big things that I would look back on and tell myself is, one, you don't need to be me. And two, the version of you thought was effective is not universally effective. And you can be far more effective by looking at not how crazy you can be, but looking at the person and saying, what is it that you need? And then trying to give that to them. And so those were the two things I'd say.
Man, that's good. I was talking about this with somebody just recently, and because you and I share having coached so many level 1 and level 2s, like what was modeled for us was like a initially like a 2-day experience, which is kind of like going on a first date with somebody. And so the facilitators of that need to be very extroverted, like the biggest version of yourself. And then when you compare that with having a relationship with somebody for 10 years, it's like at some point, the thing you can't keep that up. And it's like, okay,
no.
how are we going to do this song and dance back and forth if I'm seeing you 4 times a week for 10 years? And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, I'm by the way, the reason I look I've got the camera right here and then I've got you right here. So if you see my eyes going, that's what I'm looking between.
I thought you were just cross-eyed. I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, well, I do appreciate you not calling out my cross eyes to everything. I often think about that. Even the L1 to the L2, the L1 is a performance. It has to be. It has to be it has to be something that is capable of shifting the paradigm of the people who attend it. So there has to be a bit of like a in your face wow factor to it. So it's much more of a song and dance. Like we've said all the stuff thousands of times. We've said all the jokes thousands of times and the cues thousands of times. We've seen all the people. So, but it still has to come with that punch. Whereas that's so different to a long-term relationship with a person. It's like, I mean, it's exactly like a relationship with the person, it's exactly like a
Yeah.
relationship with a significant other, where you're like, you can be this this over the top in love, da 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 da, for the first little bit of time, but how are you going to spend the rest of your life with this person? And there has to be like a stepping back and being like, oh, things have to be different, and yeah, there's a huge reckoning, I think, internally when we do realize that. But there's so much, just like in a relationship, there's so much to gain beyond that. Like, if you make it through that, I don't need to have this performance anymore.
Mm.
I can connect with you on a different level. There's so much to gain beyond that in both relationships as well as the health and fitness space.
So level one's like a hot Tinder date, and then coaching someone in the gym is like marriage.
It's like marriage. And as we all know, not everyone's successful at those two things.
How long have you and Taz been married?
We've been married since 2012. We've been together since 2009, but I guess 10 years was our marriage, but we've been together for
Right on.
12.
Yeah. So me and Kel got married in 2009. So basically
Similar.
our lives are have been unknowingly to us, like transitioning to these different phases. But that leads into my second question: parenthood,
Okay.
fatherhood. I grew up with all brothers. I now have all girls. So my
Yeah.
parenting experience is drastically different than yours. And
Yeah.
so I want to hear what's the most challenging thing of raising all boys.
I think that's I mean, I can only speak to raising all boys. So like, I'm not going to be able to compare it to like, what's the most challenging thing compared to raising girls. But I can tell you what, in my perspective, has been very challenging, but I couldn't tell you if that's boys necessarily, that's making it challenging. But if I had to guess what I think is going to be pretty challenging, and what has been relatively challenging is I think because my boys are boys and because I am a man, the most closely resembling thing to them is me. Right? They're a boy. They have a penis. I have a penis. So like, they're like, that guy roughly resembles me. Like, I mean, I love my mom and they're definitely little mama's boys, but that guy resembles me. So the example of what I should be as I grow is that. So they look to me as the model for what they're going to be in the world, which then places a burden on my shoulders to not be a piece of shit, which, as we all know, is difficult. And I struggle with massive components of my being on the daily because I know what I do models for them who they're going to be.
Yeah.
And that then brings a lot of focus on to myself, which I don't like having a ton of focus on myself, but is necessary for these kids to not be pieces of shit as they move through the world. So I think the hardest part is just knowing that who I am is going to profoundly impact how they walk through the world. And that's my perspective on it, at least.
So what are some of those things that are really important to you? Like when you think about, okay, these guys are looking to me as the reference or the initial model of what they need to grow up to be. Like, what are some of those things that you and Taz have decided, like, hey, for our kids, these are things that are really important. And of all the things that I can model, if they just came away with, these one or two pillars, like what would they be?
I'll tell you some easy things for me to model, and then I'll tell you some of the harder things for me to model.
This is good.
The easier things for me to model are not lying. Like, I think lying is a fundamental crumbling of one's being. And even in like little lies where it's like my
Mhm.
son will jump in the pool and he's supposed to touch the bottom and he doesn't touch the bottom. And he'll be like, yeah, I touched the bottom. And I'm like, that's not okay. Like, it really bothers me. Like, because I
Mhm.
can't, I really don't, it's hard for me to value people who lie. And because I think that it fundamentally shows something broken if you lie about yourself or to the world or things like that. So not lying, and I don't have any issue not lying. So I don't have an issue like over telling the truth, like
Mhm.
like like when wife comes out and says, hey, you look like shit, and I'm like, or do I look great? And I'm like, what do you want me to say?
Yeah.
But like I and
What
I
do
can
you
be nice
think?
about it. What do you I don't have much of a hard time telling the truth. So that's one that's easy for me to model, and I really want my boys to be. Um, one that's harder for me to model uh, is like always following through on what I say I'm going to do.
Mm.
And just due to the nature of how many asks I get in a day from my boys, hey, can
Mhm.
we do this? Hey, can we do this? Hey, can we do this? Inevitably, I'm going to say, yeah, okay, later tonight we can do this. And sometimes it just doesn't work out to where that's possible. But I don't want that to be what they understand it to be. I don't want them to go through the world and be promising something to someone, because that's kind of like lying. Like, I'm promising it to them and then I'm not doing it. So it kind of goes back to that same thing. So
Yeah.
being able to follow through on what you say is hard for me to model sometimes, and so I have to be careful with what I promise, or go out of my way to be uncomfortable to follow through on that action.
Yeah.
um and then I think one that's easier for me to model is being uh grateful and happy
Mm.
with a lot of what I have. Like I can get frustrated, but I can also be pretty darn quick to bounce back and be like, oh, sweet. Like
Mhm.
let's look what we have. Like, we were outside this morning and we were sitting in the hot tub, and there's freaking the sunrise, like purple and beautiful, and we're counting the number of birds flying overhead, and it's just like, it's so easy to be grateful in these situations. And even in situations where it's like, yesterday I found out that this EMT course I signed up for, that I put kind of all my eggs in this basket to do this EMT and then go apply for fire.
Oh, cool.
Um, but it's like a 5-week intensive EMT course, and I had like all these things lined up to afterwards. They canceled the course, and we had all this stuff set up for it because there's not enough enrollment. So now I have to do this 10-week course, and I was
Mhm.
really bummed. But then I was like, but if I do the 10-week, it's not intensive, and I can do the sessions at home, and I get to spend more time with the kids. We can go snowboarding more this year. So in the moment, I was so devastated because I had put all my eggs in this basket. But it's pretty easy for me, just for some reason in my mentality, to step back and be like, there's a great side to this. So that's easy for me.
Man, that's a wonderful thing to model and hopefully get them to mimic.
We hope. And
Yeah.
then the other hardest one for me that I wish that I is the anger thing. And we talked a bit about this last week. Is
Mm.
my initial
Mhm.
reaction is anger to everything. So I really want to try more and harder to not emulate having anger be the response to life's problems. And I'm working on it, and I apologize often, and I I find myself having longer conversations with my more advanced child who's older. And I think I'm going to continue to have to do those and continue to have to grow there for it to be something that I can truly emulate. How
Yeah,
about you?
oh man. Well, first of all, what a wonderful thing to be able to apologize to your kid. Like that's something that Kel and I talk a lot about because, you know, I thought my parents were perfect, never got or needed apologies from them. And then, when you become an adult, it's like, oh man, this guy's jacked up too. So I think
Yeah.
like, modeling forgiveness and just recognition like, hey, I really messed up here. Would you forgive me for that? Like to see even just a 4-year-old try to process and comprehend that, I think is, a really beautiful thing. Um, the You mentioned telling the truth, and that's something that's super important to the two of us as well. But I have a question, because our kids are relatively the same age. How have you handled the holidays? Like, how have you handled the myth of Santa Claus, which is
Yeah.
essentially, it's like, I, I don't know how you, um, do
I
you,
handle it.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
have an answer for this because as we spoke last time, I'm not particularly religious either. Like I'm open to faith, but I think there's many things that are not super hard facts. And so I'll answer that in a more vague way, like there are people who don't believe in Santa. And when you believe in him, it makes the magic of Santa real, and answer it in those ways.
Hmm.
And my older sons can start to understand that. And then if he were to ask me directly, do you believe in Santa? I'd be like, yeah, I believe in Santa. I believe in Santa as a force for good will, and this time of year where we look to give to others and all these other things. So I go deeper with it
Mm-hmm.
and talk about the truths that are in the fable that is there. Similarly, with my mom's incredibly Catholic, so she puts a lot of uh Jesus forward things in their minds, of like, my kid will say something like, where the moon came from, God, and like I have to be like, well, yeah, that's definitely what Nana thinks. Like the moon came directly from God. There are people who believe differently, and I'll express the other side of it as well. um so I just try not to speak as concretely about things that are clearly outside my realm of understanding.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I handle the holidays, or things that are a little bit of the fanciful side, like magic and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been a tough one for me because, in theory, up to this point, it's like, hey, we're going to always tell our kids the truth, but we also love stories and we love
They're
myths
great.
and we love
Yeah.
imagination and creativity and all that stuff. And so, my 6-year-old point blank asked, like, hey, is Santa real or are you Santa? It wasn't like where I could kind of, dodge it or say, hey, what do you
Oh,
think? So that was tough, and I
how'd you
ended
answer
up,
it?
well, I didn't say I'm Santa, all your
Yeah.
dreams are ruined. I just said there's a big secret. There's a big secret about Santa. And I know the secret. And I'll tell you the secret if you ask. But once you ask, you can never not know. And so the second you know the answer, the mystery is gone. And so
Right.
really the only decision you have to make, Scarlett, is if you want to know the mystery or if you want to keep Christmas feeling like it does right now. And she's like, okay, all right.
She's like,
I
okay,
don't
Dad,
know
I
if that
checked out after the first like three sentences of that. That's what my 6-year-old does. So like my 10-year-old will start to like, he'll go further.
yeah.
My 6-year-old, like I'll try, like he'll ask a complex question and I'll give a complex answer. And he's just like, cool, moves on. Like it's so funny.
Have you seen
Um,
Fantastic Mr. Fox? Where like
yes.
their eyes just kind of like, glaze over.
Yeah.
It's
Like
kind of
exactly. I think that's a good answer, man. I think that's more truthful than what I did, and I think
oh,
that some people might look at what I say of like, I believe in telling the truth, and then hear about my ways around things like that and be like, you hypocrite. But I do think that the way I'm doing it is as correct as I can, and
yeah,
that's what I'm going to go for. I
totally.
think I think it's easy to kind of split the two as you go there. Yeah.
Mhm. But it's hard, man. It's like the
Yeah.
black and white things like, hey, did you touch the pool? Like that's easy, but
That's an easy one. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
there are ones out there that are less easy, and that yeah.
Okay. Last question. Probably the best question.
Oh,
What piece of clothing when you were growing up that when you put it on, you looked at yourself in the mirror and you said, I got it. You looked at yourself and it's like, I've never looked cooler than I do right now. Do you have something that's totally material that you just felt like, man,
yeah,
I've never been so cool?
yeah. I mean, hats. Uh, I was a hat guy. So like
Okay, let's go
backward
into detail.
caps. I even had a fedora. Not like what's the one that like comes down and like it like pinches. It's kind of like the Newsies
Oh,
hat.
like a newsboy cap.
Exactly. I had one of those and I'd wear it
Oh,
backwards and stuff. And I thought I was like, to this day, I love wearing hats, but it's like, now it's cause I'm like pretty much bald. So it's like, it just covers up the spot and keeps me looking good. But yeah, hats were always my thing. Like I always didn't like my hair for some reason, unless it was like
huh.
freshly cut. So hats made me feel awesome. And I wore them constantly. Beanies, Santa hats, all these things. Like I would do it all for most of the year I had a hat on.
Is there one that
But
stands out as like this?
there's one that stands
This is
out.
the best hat.
It was the one that I was talking about, the newsy hat. Like it was like the newsboy like came down and I'd rock it backwards. I have like one of my most vivid oldest standing memories is me wearing that. It's a photo of me uh wearing that hat in my class photos, like me, like, you know, these ones, and I've got it backwards and I'm
Mhm.
like, and it's just, I'm freaking nailing it.
You never been so cool.
No, I hands down the coolest. What about you? What was yours?
Ah, I had a puka shell necklace that when I put
Hell
that
yeah, you
on,
did.
I was like,
Yeah.
no girl could resist me.
Yeah, you
Acne
did.
based, you know, 160
Did you
pounds
have acne?
oh man, yeah, I had bad skin, late
Same.
bloomer, but I put that
Same.
necklace on. It's like
And just bang.
my sins are as white as snow.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing. We being from Santa Cruz, those
Yeah.
signified that you were not from Santa Cruz. Like
Yeah.
that was exactly what it did. So like I saw those come out and I was like, oh, that's pretty sick. And then the ethos around not being from the ocean, but having ocean stuff was
Yeah.
like, it's like the person who wears, you know, underwear under their board shorts, where you're like, you're clearly not from here, bro.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know, it was, and
here's a tourist right here.
yeah, yeah. So that kind of fell into that world, but I'd always see it. I actually had a huge stage where a girlfriend I was with, one of my very first long-term girlfriends, she's an absolutely amazing girl and woman, and I thank her so much for all that I ever, you know, learned from her. But her mother and her couldn't really appreciate the lack of clothing that I had. I think I had a pair of pants,
Hmm.
and maybe some shorts that were too big for me and some baggy t-shirts. And they took me shopping every time I saw them. But at the time, it was when I was going, they were going like, it was like Abercrombie and Fitch and Hollister. And like, so I'm wearing like the pop collars and the blah, 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 and like the stuff that is so not surf, but they were like buying it like crazy. So I had like, I met her, I had one pair of pants. When we ended up separating, it was like, I must have had 40 pairs of pants. And I had like no joke. It was like every time I went with them, that was how she showed love. Not
Ah,
the girl
pants.
necessarily, but the mother. And it
Uh-huh.
was pants and shirts and polos and like
Straight
all
pants.
extra small, you know, just like I'm like this pinner little 140-pound kid wearing the tightest extra smalls you could. But yeah, there's some fond memories of that, but it's fun times
That's
thinking back.
amazing. I'd like to
Yeah.
think, and I documented evidence here that I was the one that made Abercrombie and Fitch popular. Like it was me that really
You did that? Good for you.
brought it to the Southwest. So if
Good
anybody
for you,
watches
man.
this, you're
Way to bring that
welcome. Wasn't
back,
a big
or
deal.
way to bring it to us. Well, I did end up working out front the store.
Did you?
Mm-hmm. I
We're
worked at the
talking.
store folding, and then I did the shirtless model in the mall for about.
Of course you
See,
did. Of course you
I
did.
the funniest part is
They
like,
were lucky to have you.
homie, I was tiny. Like I was like, you can find old photos of me, and maybe I'll try to find one for this, but like I'm like a buck 45, buck 50, maybe 5'6", 5'7", and just skinny, like
Hmm.
just skinny. And I'm like flexing my brains out, like trying to do this stuff. That was so important back then. And it was, oh man, as a very steady 180-pound man at the moment, it's a
It's
different story.
another life.
Yeah. Well, that was good, man. Thank you for the questions. I owe you 3. Next week we will get after it.
Can't wait.